Hey everyone, in this video I'll show you how I attach this breadboard using a dovetail joint on the tabletop and the breadboard using this router and a router table. So here's the basic layout of the table. There's a breadboard on each end. So aside from the breadboard just looking cool, it actually does serve a purpose. So as the boards expand and contract over time, it'll prevent the boards from cupping and keep the tabletop flat. So an easier way to attach the breadboard would be to use pocket holes, dowels, or just glue. The problem with that is over time, the tabletop will become prone to cracking because dowels or pocket hole screws will not allow the wood to move. And so what I mean by the wood moving is that the wood will expand and contract across the grain this way. So with warm temperatures and a high humidity, these boards will actually expand this way. And when it's cold and there's no humidity, these boards will contract this way. So because I'm going to attach these together using a dovetail, the breadboard will stay tight against the tabletop going this way, but the tabletop is actually free to expand and contract this way without causing stress to the breadboard. So this is the router bit that I'm going to use to cut these. So what I'm going to do is take a router and route a channel going through the top this way. Then I'm going to put this bit on the router table, cut a dovetail on this side as well as this side, and then a dovetail tongue will be left, which will slide into this tabletop. So the tabletop is clamped with the ends up, and I'm going to run the router down the top of this using edge guides. So here's the router I'm going to use with this, and I'm going to put an edge guide on each side. So I'm gonna line this bit up as close to the center as I can get, tighten down the router to these bars as well as the edge guides on the bars so that everything is secure and that this won't slide back and forth like this. So you should be able to freely slide this back and forth, but you don't want a whole lot of play or wobble because this channel needs to be as straight as can be. So now that I have the edge guides on, I want to set the depth of the router bit, and I want the top of the router bit to come just to the top of this. So I couldn't get a good angle with the camera. This is a different dovetail bit, but essentially this is what the bit will look like when it's plunged. So everything is set up and tightened, and I'm going to take the router and route a groove right down the top. So the router worked really well other than having to stop it to sweep out the channel. I'm gonna flip this over and I'm going to hook up the vacuum and see if I get any better results that way. Alright, so with the vacuum on, there is still a significant amount of chips, but the vacuum pulled the chips away from the router bit enough to keep it from bogging down. So I actually got this entire groove in one pass. I will have to clean it out now, but that was better with the vacuum on. Now, if you don't have a router that's capable of cutting that, or you don't want to cut that in one pass, you can take a straight bit, cut a groove out, then come back with the dovetail and cut through that after. So I took the same router bit that was in the router and I put it in the router table. So next I'll adjust the fence and then run the breadboard across this to take out a dovetail on this side. Then I'll flip the breadboard over this way, take another dovetail off the other side, and I'll be left with dovetail tongue here. So here's the first side, and this is where the dovetail bit cut out. So I'm gonna flip this over so this side is on the rail, and then I'll cut another piece out similar to this in the opposite direction, and I'll be left with a tongue right there. Now as I cut this piece out, there's a very low chance that the tongue is gonna be the exact size that'll fit in the groove. So I can adjust the fence a little bit one way or the other to either leave more or less of a tongue. So I'm only going to cut into the board, maybe up to here, and then I'll see if this first piece fits into the groove. If the tongue is too wide, I can move the fence further in and leave a smaller tongue. If I've taken way too much off and I have too thin of a tongue, I can just cut this off with a miter saw and start the process over. So I'll probably have to make several adjustments to get this lined up, but this will be my test piece to where I get the fence perfect so that I won't mess up on the breadboards. Okay, so ideally the tongue will fit in the groove here, and this will be a perfect fit. I must have gotten really lucky because this is actually really close. Usually on my first cut, I'm off by quite a bit. So this will fit right down in here. So this is centered, but there's a little tiny gap right here. So I'm gonna move the bit up just a bit and try to recut these. So this is the new dovetail. This fit much better because I think this is about perfect. So the dovetail you saw me just make was on a scrap board, which served as a test piece in order to get the fence on the router table lined up perfectly. So after the test piece fit in the tabletop perfectly, I then recut the dovetail joint on the actual breadboard. So this clip is sped up about 20 times. This is actually a pretty slow process. Anytime you're using a angled bit, you want to slow down and really give the router enough time to make the cut. So here's the full dovetail tongue, and this should fit perfectly down in the groove that we cut earlier. So now I'm going to try to fit the breadboard tongue into the actual table groove. So both breadboards are on now. Using the pipe clamp to pull the breadboard across was a little bit more effort than I was hoping for, but it did work. So now I'll cut these the same width as the tabletop with the track saw, then run a chamfer bit and a router across the whole table to give it some trim as detail. So now the breadboards are flush on each side. I'm going to turn the top sideways and rip a little bit off of each edge of the breadboard because the top overall is a little too long. So I want to shorten it up. So I'm going to take about 2 inches off of each side. So the breadboards are cut flush, the top is sanded, and I routed the edge with a chamfer bit. The last thing I want to do is flip the table over and glue a dowel in the center of the dovetail joint to keep it from moving in the middle. So this is the dovetail joint, and what I'm going to do is take a Forstner bit and drill about right here. Then I'm going to glue a dowel in one spot in the very center of the table on this joint to keep it from moving in the middle. So I know that I'm on the dovetail joint because I can see how the grain runs in the opposite direction. So if I glue a dowel in here, the breadboard will be tight here, but loose everywhere else. So as these boards expand and contract, they're free to move along the breadboard, but the breadboard will stay in place because it's glued in this spot. So here's the finished product with the breadboards on and the tabletop on. So not only do they give the top a lot more character, but they'll actually keep the top from bowing and cupping over time. And the dovetail joint allows all the boards to expand and contract properly without having to worry about stability issues over time. So thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll put a link to all the products and tools I used in this video in the description, and stay tuned for more.